great song. All right, we're talking this hour, and thanks for the messages, about hair loss and the decisions at some point in your life you might have to make, men and women, about whether you're going to shave it off, get the buzz cut, get on with it, or if you're a woman, what other options there are for you. And the big celebrity thing is to go and have a hair transplant. Now, I often wondered, well, what does that mean? And what costs involved with it? And is that then a permanent solution to baldness, especially if it's, let's say, hereditary? Or it could be linked to illness, clearly. But I think for a lot of men, it's knowing you've got this great head of hair and then it's going to absolutely nothing. And so you stand there and think, look in the mirror, and think, right, I'll just shave it off and be bald? Or do you want to do something about it? I do believe it takes courage to do that. And I think because you want to get it right, and it also costs money to do that. And it's about the decisions you make along the way. And you might think there's nothing wrong with bald heads anyway. Indeed, there is not. But for some men, I get it. I sort of know it, because if for a woman, it must be a really big deal knowing what to do. Well, let's speak to someone who's worked in this field and been through it for a considerable amount of time, very well known worldwide. And his name is Spencer Stephenson. And he's in our Nottingham studio for us this afternoon. How are you, Spencer?
Hi, I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I'm really glad that you're here, and thank you for coming. Now, just tell us a bit about your story.
Cool. Well, I mean, I started to lose my hair at a young age of 21. I'm 43 now. So it really hit me pretty hard to start losing my hair. I had a great full head of hair. I was called the Hoff growing up. So for me, it really affected my identity and my image, my self-confidence, and my self-worth when I started to lose my hair. And I panicked, and I tried everything that was out there. We were limited in terms of research tools to establish what worked and what didn't work. We used to refer to the yellow pages back then. So, long story short, I tried everything you could think of, everything that was available. I tried laser treatment, lotions, potions. I wore a wig. I tried to shave all my hair off, and I just struggled with that. I struggled with that concept because I just didn't feel that it was me. It didn't portray the image I felt that was me. And I have all the well done to everybody that does decide to shave it off and can deal with it. But for me personally, it was a real struggle, and I ended up having a hair transplant procedure back in the early 2000s, which unfortunately didn't result in a very natural look. So I kind of jumped from the frying pan into the fire. Long story short, I've had several repair procedures, and I now run a website, spexhair.com, to help educate and empower people from making the same mistakes that I'd made, because this industry is cutthroat. It's a multi-billion-pound industry, and 99% of products and services out there don't actually work.
You see, I find that fascinating. And we were just speaking to someone who works here in West Yorkshire with women, cancer patients and men on hair replacement and various different solutions. And I said to her, you've got to make sure, if you're going to take this route, that you find someone who knows what they're doing. And for the average man or woman, we'll talk about men, I think, with you, Spencer, who, make the decision that you did. It's knowing where to start and what the options are and what it's going to cost you and what the big deal is, because I also think it takes courage to do it. Am I right?
Indeed, indeed, very much so. And it is, unfortunately, a minefield, this industry. And unfortunately, with the social media epidemic that we're dealing with currently, everybody's claiming to be the best in the world at it. And everybody's claiming to, offer you the world. Unfortunately, the vast majority of those Facebook, Instagram, Twitter pages do not provide the service that they say they do. And, there are organisations out there that are very credible. The International Alliance of Hair Restoration Surgeons, which encapsulates a number of surgeons that are very, very good and actually do what they say they can do, and have a high level of ethics and honesty to help and have the patient's best interest at heart first, because surgery essentially is a last resort. Yeah. And any good surgeon will make sure sure that a patient has looked at every other option, tried to shave their hair off, tried to deal with their hair loss the best that they can before electing to have surgery. And there are only a number of clinics in the world, that I would personally trust my head with, knowing what I know and dealing with the number of repair patients and patients that I do, especially in the UK.
Spencer Stephenson is here, and he is a hair loss, expert, I'll call you that, but he's been through this in himself, and we're talking about going bald. Do you embrace it or don't you? Let me just ask you this. If I or a bloke wanted a hair, let's say bloke in his 30s, definitely losing the hair, can't stand it in the way that you couldn't stand it, tried everything, right, I'm going to have a transplant. Well, how much are we talking about?
It all depends. It's how long is a piece of string. Essentially, the average hair transplant, because it depends how much you need. It depends on how much real estate you need to have covered. It depends what technique you use. So there's a few variables to consider. But on average, it isn't as costly as it's perceived in the media. The average hair transplant by a very reputable, good, skillful surgeon in the region of £8,000 to £10,000 as a guide, £5,000 to £10,000 depends on how much you need. Essentially, if you're really, really bald, then you might not be a candidate. If you've only got a small amount of loss, then it might only cost £2,000 or £3,000. It's all relevant to the amount that you need doing.
And what happens? Do you take hair elsewhere and stick it in the head? I mean, I'm being very simplistic here because it is fine. Surgery. So how on earth? What is it if you've got a transplant? Where, how?
Okay. Well, hair comes. It is moved, it is transplanted from the back and the sides, and it is placed in the recipient area. So it's removed from the donor region in the sides and the back of the head, where you'll see on the vast majority of bald guys who shave down, they've still got that 5 o'clock shadow around the sides and the back of the head. That hair is genetically coded not to fall out. So they transplant, doctors use that hair and they use it effectively and appropriately and distribute the extractions across the entire back of the area. So it's not all kind of, it's not moth-eaten or taken all from one place, and then they transplant that accordingly and appropriately into the recipient area, which is the area at the front or the middle where the hair is needed.
And do they knock you out? Does it hurt?
No, it's all done under local anaesthetic. It's more discomfort than pain. It's like going for a root canal. It's not painful, but it's it's uncomfortable. I mean, I've had several procedures over the years. Pain is not a thing that I attribute to having the procedures. It's more ironically, sitting in a chair all day, your body aches and your body stiffens up because you're just having to lie in the same position for a very extended period of time.
We're talking hair replacement, particularly hair transplants this afternoon. You see, this is lovely to be able to talk about, Spencer. Spencer Stephenson is here because you don't hear these conversations. As you've said, it sort of exists in magazines. We've had a Coronation Street actor who's local. He's had a hair transplant. He's come out about it. It's all absolutely fine. But people don't kind of sit down and say, what do I do? Do I just inevitably have to go bald? And I think the one thing that you've done this lunchtime is you've made me aware how vulnerable some people are. Because if there's a snake oil that promises that your hair will grow back, or that you can get this system or that, people are so vulnerable, they'll go to it, won't they?
Oh, indeed. And unfortunately, hair loss sufferers, we suffer in silence because it's our Achilles heel. We don't want to be open about it. We don't want to talk about it. And therefore, we are very vulnerable. We are very desperate. And mistakes can be made very easily. And we set up resources, and there are fantastic resources like the Bald Truth radio show out there where people can tune in and listen to tens of thousands of people over the past years talking about their hair loss and their hair transplant experiences. And people really identify with that because they gain comfort that they're not alone, they're not isolated, and they can share with others alike. And it's great that celebrities are coming out in the media about their hair loss and hair transplants because it's breaking down some stigmas associated with it and making hair loss a bit more acceptable to talk about.
Have you ever had along the way, when you've undergone wigs and laser and then the hair transplant that had to be put right and all that goes with it, people sort of going, nudge, nudge, it's got a wig, Have you had that?
I've worn a wig years ago. One of the initial processes that I went through, and it just was not natural to me. It just didn't sit right with me. I felt very unnatural, and that led me down into what other options have I got available, and that led me into hair transplantation. Now, with hair transplantation, you will never clock a good hair transplant. You'll always clock a bad one, but you'll never clock a good one.
And are they forever? Well, a bit like, dog at
Yeah, hair transplants do last for a lifetime. It's taken from the hair, the sides and the back, which, like I say, is genetically coded. You can look at really old men, call them 80, 90-year-old guys that are bald on top, but you'll see the amount of hair they have around the sides and back of their head. That's the hair that is used, and it's for a good ethical surgeon to determine the candidate's eligibility for a hair transplant. Not everybody is eligible, but the vast majority of people are. The hair that grows in the donor region, the sides and the back, grows for a lifetime, and therefore you can utilize it for a hair transplant.
There will be men and their partners listening now who would never in a million years ring up this radio station and say, I'm bald and I hate it, or are secretly trying to do all sorts of stuff to sort of cover up their hair loss and feel very not confident about taking a step. So thank you for going through the transplant. What would you say to that man who's got, the comb over, or he's using the fibres on the bit of the crown of the head, or he's very unsure about the way ahead? I know you would say a transplant's the way forward, but what would you say to that man to man, about how your life has been better because of this?
Well, I think it's each to their own, isn't it? And not everybody wants to have a hair transplant, but essentially everybody wants to have hair. People would rather have hair than not. So it's up to that individual, if they really want to do something about it, is to do your research, look into proven treatments that actually work to prevent the further progression of hair loss, look into resources like the Bald Truth, the International Alliance of Hair Restoration Surgeons, and do your own due diligence and see if it's surgery is for you. Surgery, like I say, is a last resort. It's not for everybody, but if hair loss really troubles you and it really worries you, then there are options available for you to do something about it.
I'm really grateful for your time, Spencer. Thank you, and I hope you've helped someone along the way. Spencer Stephenson. You can look at the website spexhair.com and see where that journey might begin, if that's something you feel you want to do. So we've been talking about going bald or not this afternoon.